This is the Sony A7S Mark III, and I've been a Panasonic shooter for a while now. I shot Sony kind of way back a few years ago, but I switched completely over to Panasonic, and this is the camera that's bringing me back to Sony. Alright guys, let's get into it. So before we get into my thoughts around this camera and why I'm so excited about it, I just want to show you some footage that I shot last night, this morning, and I also just want to mention that Sony sent me this camera to test out. I already pre-ordered one, I pre-ordered a ton of lenses, all of that, but they sent me this one early because next week I'm headed up to a farm up in NorCal, and I'm shooting a little mini documentary around a sustainable farm called Belcampo, and I'm going to put this camera to work on that project and really get a feel for how it works in a real world setting. So guys, I'm going to post that main documentary that I'm shooting on my second channel. I'll link to it and down below in the description, and then I'm going to do a much more in-depth review of this camera after that experience here on this channel. But let's take a look at some footage that I shot this morning. So you can see from this footage that you can get some pretty incredible results out of this camera. You gotta remember, like any camera nowadays that's coming out is gonna be good. There's been so many advances in camera technology that no matter what camera you go for now, you can get good looking footage. Now it really comes down to what features are gonna work best for your workflow. I'm actually shooting on the Panasonic S5 right now for this studio because I have the A7S Mark III right here. I still like the Panasonic S5, I just did a video about it. However, it's not the best camera for run and gun style shooting. So my YouTube content where I'm like on the go, it's run and gun, I need to just grab quick shots, like the S5 just does not work that well. And if you saw that video, there's a lot of issues with like cropping footage, and there's just a lot of things that really hinder my workflow and that you have to think about while you're shooting. Now with the Sony, the things that really stand out for me is the fact that good autofocus. Like that hands down for a run and gun style shooter is so key. Just having good autofocus that locks on someone's face, someone's eye, like that's essential. And beyond that, with a full frame sensor, the Sony has 4K 60 and 4K 120 that is almost the entire width of the sensor. With 4K 120, you have a 1.1 crop. However, that is so minimal in the grand scheme of things. 1.1 is almost not noticeable at all when you're out shooting. With the S5, when I've been shooting with it, you do a APS-C crop when you go to 4K 60. So having the ability to shoot full frame on all the resolutions that I'm gonna shoot on makes a huge difference in workflow. So the first thing I did when I got this camera was I set up my custom settings. I set up 4K 30 because that's what I shoot my real-time footage in, 4K 60 because I shoot 4K 60 all the time. I'm just so used to that with the GH5. But now that I have 4K 120, that makes a huge difference because that's one feature that I've always wanted when I've been working with my GH5. And it's just nice to have 4K through all the frame rates that I'm gonna shoot in, and you can also get 10-bit footage out of this camera. Now, the other major thing about Sony is that Sony has a massive lens lineup. Like, there's so many lenses that you can get for this camera. So I got the 16 to 35 and I have the 135. However, I have a bunch of other lenses coming. I have the entire lineup of the 1.8s because those are smaller lenses, but you could still open up pretty wide. So a 20, a 50, an 85, a 35, the 135. The lens lineup for Sony is so good that you can choose to get smaller lenses if you need smaller lenses, but if you want bigger lenses, then you can go for the G Masters. They're bigger. However, depending on what style shooter you are, that might be a good choice. There's just so many options when it comes to lenses on this camera. And when it comes to the S5, there's very little lenses. And I don't even want to talk about the Canon because of overheating and things like that. And obviously I need to test this camera. It's overheating, but everything that I've seen online, I haven't seen any issues with overheating in like a normal workflow. Panasonic for me has always been a solid choice when it comes to just build construction, taking it in the elements, but Sony has really improved their cameras, and I'm excited to take this camera up a mountain or take it out into the wild jungles of Thailand whenever we can travel again, and just see how it's able to perform in extreme conditions. Now, the stabilization is not as good as I'm used to with the Panasonic. However, one thing that's really cool with the A7S Mark III is that now you can use Catalyst Browse and actually stabilize using gyroscopic data. It just gives you another tool in the toolbox. This camera has decent stabilization from what I'm seeing. Everything that I shot from that little sequence earlier was all handheld. So the stabilization is good in body. However, I've added a little bit of post-stabilization to a few shots. And then also, I played around with this Catalyst Browse and, with a really horribly unstabilized shot. So here's the original shot. And you can see like that there's almost no way to save that. So I used the Catalyst Browse and then added some stabilization on top of that. Now, yes, you're gonna crop in, but using this method, I was able to save this shot to a point where it's much more usable. It's obviously not perfect. However, if you are in a situation where you need to just grab a handheld shot and weren't able to stabilize it that well, you have an extra tool in your toolbox for stabilization with this gyroscopic data and being able to do this post-stabilization in Catalyst Browse. Honestly, if I want a stable shot, I'm gonna use a gimbal. It's not a complete replacement of a gimbal. However, there's a lot of times where I'm handheld shooting, I don't wanna pull out my gimbal. And if I just focus on getting the most stable shot that I can handheld, I know that I can use the Catalyst Browse and be able to stabilize that even more. And then if I need to take it a step further, I can add a little bit more post-stabilization on it and probably save a lot of shots. There's so many times where I've been like run and gun. In the moment, I'm just grabbing quick shots and it just ends up super shaky, and I would have liked to have been able to stabilize it a little bit more, and the warp stabilizer didn't necessarily work that well in Final Cut. So it really comes down to workflow and how you shoot to be able to use some of these tools. Now, is this the perfect camera for everyone? No. Like if you're a photographer, you might not want this camera because it's lower megapixel. Lower megapixel means better low light capabilities for video, but it also means that your photos are not gonna be like 50, 60, 100 megapixel. I'm a video shooter. Like I focus mainly on video, and then I also do photography as well. So this is the perfect YouTuber, video, run and gun, adventure filmmaker, on the go creator camera that I've come across because of all the features that it has built into it. And I know I've only had it for a day, but just working with it for a day, I'm like, this is the camera that I've been waiting for. And guys, like I said earlier, I'm headed out to this farm. I'm gonna go shoot this mini documentary. Make sure you're subscribed to my second channel so that you can see when that pops up. But also after shooting that documentary, I'll have a lot more to talk about this camera and then be able to break down kind of my thoughts around all the features and what I like, what I don't like, and really take this camera through a workflow that's gonna work for my filming style. All right, guys, make sure you're subscribed to my second channel so you don't miss when I post that documentary. And obviously, I'm going to have a lot on here. So if you are just interested in camera reviews, tutorials, things like that, make sure you're subscribed here. And guys, that's it. I'll see you on the next one.